Also, I encourage you to open your camera, show yourself. If you're, I know sometimes we're eating dinner at this time and we don't really want other people to see us chewing, but as soon as you're ready, go ahead and turn on your camera, because it helps with your networking and helps me, but just helps with your networking as well, so that you're able to build a community. And in that community, you can study better, and it really helps you throughout your whole career to have that community. Let's see what else. I think that's about it. We'll do the same sort of method as we did last time, which is lots of questions and fill in the blanks, because the more engaged you are, I try to design this so that you can be engaged, and the more engaged you are, the more you retain. And so that's why I'm trying to make it so that we can have more engagement, more discussion. Sharing stories is always good. And don't hesitate to look at your materials and read me what you see in the materials as you're highlighting it or making note of it, because the questions I've asked are generally based on some pretty key concepts. So, all right, so with that, let's talk about succession planning. If you recall, this whole section is about human resource planning. And so remember, big picture, if we're coming from a place of planning, things like mergers, acquisitions, hiring, how many people to hire, succession planning, strategic planning. And so here we are tonight. Now, just we'll kick it off talking about succession planning. And of course, that is the process of figuring out how that our management vacancies are going to be filled. And so there are really a couple things that we have to keep in mind while we're doing that. So first thing we need to know is our managerial candidates. What are their career interests? Not too long ago, where I was working, we had this brilliant candidate for management position, and we were opening a new office in Dallas. And oh my gosh, he was the perfect candidate. He had all the requirements. He was just a stand-up guy, perfect prospect for manager. So we opened up the office and everything, and came forward to him and said, "Hey, you have been chosen. You're the heir apparent to the management position over here in this new office." And he turned us down. We failed to find out what this individual's career interests were. Well, he was had a young family, and he said, with my young family, I don't want to move to Dallas. My church is here, my friends and support system. My wife works here in Fort Worth. I don't want to move to Dallas. And so that is fair. But on us, the point for this story is that one of the key steps in succession planning is finding out or assessing the career interests of our prospective managers. We can't assume that everybody's interested in being promoted to management or the relocation. So we need to know the candidate first. And then what is the performance? We need to secondly know what kind of performance have they had. And that may take some discussions and looking at records. Make sure that their performance, past performance, is up to snuff for the next job. And then what are the requirements for the position? Can't very well put somebody in place if the job requires a licensure or certification. So we need to make sure that we have all the requirements in place for each position. And then perhaps a review with other managers. So if we were designing a succession planning process, that's what we would do. Those steps: know our candidate and their career interests, what's their performance, what are the requirements of the position, and then maybe discussing it with other managers for whom this person's worked or for whom this person will be interacting in the new role. And so based on all that, one of the key steps in succession planning is development. So let's imagine this individual that we're earmarking for our new position has all the capabilities that we think he or she needs, and yet still needs some development, perhaps in interpersonal skills, perhaps in management skills, perhaps in technical skills. So we need to make sure that when we find these people who we are preparing for management, let's make sure we get them the appropriate developmental activities so that they can get their needs met and be prepared to take the next role when it's possible. So this next slide is a really good one. It's an example of a tool that we use. This isn't the only tool, but it's a good one. And you may see something like this on the test. It's called a replacement chart. And it's just an org chart that shows a quick picture of the key management positions and their relationships and what positions are available. So let's just have a look at this chart real quick and say, based on what you see here, which position needs to be filled as soon as possible? Which position needs to be filled as soon as possible? Jump in here and just shout it out.
Store manager.
Store manager.
There you go. And you knew that because it has a code A, right? And then the replacement code is need now. Good. All right. Which employee or employees need the most development to be considered for a promotion? Which ones need to be the most development?
P. Jones,
Uh-huh.
D. Lowell, and K. Krezika.
Okay, let's see. K. Lorink. Oh, I'm sorry, where are you looking? D. Lowell, you're right. And Jones was right. And Nash, do you see Nash? And S.K. Lai. That, yeah, is that what you were saying?
No, I was off a little bit, but I see what you mean.
Okay, yeah, good. So the only way we know that is because it says the promotion potential is a 3. Those people might be qualified in 1 to 2 years. So this is obviously it's a qualitative measure. In other words, it's not objective. It's more based on the expertise of the raters, and they're looking at it and saying, all right, we know, for example, the store manager is retiring, and we know that position's coming open soon. So we better get people ready right away. And so we would rate those people who are in line. Let's see, Roberts and Romano, who are actually in line for store manager, what do we think about them? Do they need much development?
No, they're ready.
Yeah, they're qualified now. So excellent assessment of this, where we just put the numbers in to get a good snapshot. Now, if we were serious about succession planning, we'd probably start a development plan with Jones, Nash, Lai, and Lowell. Thoughts or questions on succession planning? Okay, good. So with that, then let's talk about reduction in, like, as we're talking about planning, and so coming along with that has to be a reduction in planning. I mean, a reduction in labor force. So let's say it has a surplus. What would we do to reduce the hours or reduce the labor force when it has a surplus? What should we do? Probably more than one strategy. See if you can, what would you do if your company, you're the HR director, and oh my gosh, we got to reduce our labor force. What would you do?
If it's temporary, maybe a reduction in hours. If not, you may do like through attrition as people are leaving, but you could also do layoffs or give early retirement, offer early retirement.
Those are 4 really good strategies. I heard early retirement, I heard layoffs, and I heard reduced hours if it's temporary. And then the 4th one was, what did you say?
Attrition.
Attrition, yes, good. If it's a longer term strategy. So those are 4 really good strategies. And what would the effects be? Let's say on our employees, how would our employees' attitudes be affected by layoffs? How would our attitudes be?
Scared, nervous.
Scared, nervous. Probably wouldn't be getting the most productivity out of them, would we? Scared and nervous people. So what about if we did reduced hours? How would our attitudes be there?
They would be upset and want to try to figure out a way to get more hours. Frustrated at most, maybe.
Yeah. Because it's a financial burden, isn't it? So for them. So yeah, good. They would be frustrated, but probably not as bad as if they knew it was temporary and it's better than layoff. Even during COVID, if you recall, some companies did reduction in hours instead of layoffs, and thinking, well, it's temporary. It was definitely a financial strain, but it was better than layoffs. The other 2 options that you suggested probably be with much less stress on our attitudes: the attrition and the attrition and the retirement, early retirement would be much less strain on our attitudes and our productivity. So good discussion on that. Thank you. Has anyone been through merger, acquisition, anything like that? You can do a little. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
A couple of times.
A couple of times. Oh, good. Somebody with a lot of experience. Eileen, can you share your experience with this? What happened and your role?
So I worked for a relatively small convenience store chain, about 100 stores, that bought, I called it the David and Goliath merger. They bought a 400 store chain. So my part was essentially the review of all the policies, all the benefit plans, how we compensated people in the different stores in the different regions, and then also all of the HRIS components of merging data and getting everything off the same system. It was about a 1.5 year process.
Wow, that's a huge job.
Yeah, there's a reason I don't work there anymore. Burnout.
Yeah, no doubt. I was going to ask you if you were there after the merger or after that acquisition. Did you stick around afterwards, or did you leave before it was completed?
No, so I came in. They actually bought the company in November of 2019, and I came in August of 2020 when they actually started the process of merging more than just the legal paperwork. So for the first year, they operated as 2 separate companies. I was there when they started to actually operate as one company until they merged everything under one set of policies and FEIN in June of 21. And then I stayed through summer of 22.
Wow. Okay. So you did sounds like compensation, policies, benefits, perhaps,
Oh, yeah.
examining and then trying to make sure that we're on the same page. Did you have a role in the culture, merging the cultures? How did that go?
I'm laughing because if any of you have ever been to an Allsup's, West Texas or New Mexico, they're famous for their burritos, their great hangover food.
Yeah.
So that was the Goliath in the company. And the David is a very small Midwestern company that was very interested in technological advances and kind of looked down on the product of Allsup's.
Oh.
So there was we did a lot of re-educating, sending people to the other stores, but also having them get involved in the other communities so that they would understand the mindset that people were coming from. Because we had a very strong West Texas New Mexico, very proud of their city, very proud of their community, compared to people in Iowa who think that everybody rides a horse. So it was actually struggling. It was that part of it was honestly, it cost an insane amount of money, but it paid off. We started having people who could train people in the other stores about like reading historical inventory information and trends and that type of thing. That's where it really paid off.
That's a great story. Couple of things Eileen said, you can see on the list in front of us here, you know, those are some of the things that Eileen did to begin with, but the meat of the matter and the reason that a lot of mergers don't go well is that blending of people and culture. That's the primary cause of failure. So for your test, you know, all these things are important that you see on the list, but the primary cause of failure for most mergers and acquisitions is that the issues that are associated with people and culture, blending those. So just be aware of that. That's an important point. Thanks for sharing that. All right. Well, let's go move on to job analysis, job descriptions, and job specifications. Three things that you may be very well aware of, but we'll learn some key points to be aware of for our test. So let's just start with the basics. What's the name of it? What are the processes that are used to study the work that is done by employees? The processes that are used to study the work done by employees.
That the job analysis?
Good. Job analysis and?
Competency modeling.
There you go. Awesome. Well done. Yep, that's it. Those are the processes used to study the work that's done by employees. Well, let's dig in a little bit deeper. Both are, you know, produce vital information used for selection, training, and other HR functions. We base a lot on these job descriptions and job analysis. So let's separate the two out. Job analysis and competency modeling they're two separate things. Job analysis is the study of the jobs within an organization. Has anybody ever done a job analysis?
Yep.
Oh, can you tell us, you know, how did that work?
We did it as part of the acquisition that we did to see the differences in how our stores were run, and specifically for the training that people would need to be successful in stores. But it was everything from what systems are they using on the computer, how do they lay out their day, what are their responsibilities, the biggest things being like, what does an assistant manager do at one store compared to an assistant manager at another store, because there was a lot of variation. Yeah, that was pretty much it.
Super example. So here, Eileen's talking about, you get a store manager in several different stores. Are they doing the same thing? Are they compensated the same? Is their job duties the same? I did something similar, and they were with administrative assistants, and they were throughout the company, and they've started saying, well, hey, I'm being paid the same, and yet I'm managing an office, and this person on the other side of the country is merely just taking notes at meetings. So what are we going to, we're called the same thing, but it's not the same. So we did a job analysis, and we looked at what the employee does or performs, the tools, the equipment, the work aids, everything, even the technology, as Eileen was saying. So we look at how the job is being done. So that is key point for you to remember about job analysis is separate from a competency modeling, because competency is just the process of looking at specific competencies associated with being a successful high performer in the job. And when we look at competency modeling, we refer to KSABs. Does anyone know what that stands for? KSAB.
Knowledge, skills, abilities, and behaviors.
Great, thank you. So those are the things that we look at what knowledge, skills, and behaviors and abilities are essential for the successful performance. So it's what they need to know to be able to do in order to do their job. So you can see the difference. The analysis is much more about the tools and the equipment and so forth. So what are the major uses of job analysis information? What do we use them for? All that information, what do we use it for?
Recruiting and hiring.
Recruiting and hiring, what else?
Training,
Training, good, what else?
Planning,
Planning. What else?
Compensation.
Absolutely, compensation. The list in your materials looks like this. You guys hit on a lot of them. So, Eileen was talking about job redesign. What's a manager do in one place that is it the same as they do in another location? Does the Americans with Disabilities Act require us to have job descriptions? Does the ADA require us to have job descriptions? We sure use them for a lot of things. We use them for all of these things listed here. Are they
they're not
required?
required.
Say that again, Ashley.
They're not required. Not
Yes,
by
thank you. They are not required by law, right? You'd think they were because they're so important and everyone seems to have them. But no, the EEOC guidelines encourages employers to have them, but we are not required. But boy, I think it would be very foolish to not have good job descriptions in place. True or false? Competency models provide valuable benefits in the external workforce. True or false? Competency models provide valuable benefits in the external workforce.
true.
True.
True. Yes, good. Thank you. Yeah, they serve the same purposes within organizations, but they also provide valuable benefits to the external workforce. True or false? Competency models need to be aligned with business objectives. This is an easy one. True or false? Competency models need to be aligned with business objectives.
True.
True. Good, good, good. Thank you. Yeah. It follows they need to be aligned with business objectives to help make sure that our organization's successful. All right. Here's a question for you. Who launched a major initiative to create competency models for specific industries? Who did that?
Department of Labor.
Yes, they did. Thank you. They cooperated with experts in each industry, but they launched that initiative. All right, let's see what else we got here. So competency models are expected to facilitate these objectives. There's all the things we've been talking about, communicating externally, career exploration, career paths and ladders, workforce planning, curriculum or training development, evaluation, and certification or licensure. So job descriptions, that's the foundation for so many of our functions. And they identify the essential functions of the job. So this description, the job description, should be concise, it should be accurate, and it should indicate what the employee does, how they do it, and the conditions under which they do it. So the major items in a job description are what? A couple of them are up here for you already. Major items included in a job description.
Identification of the job.
Identification of the job. How do we identify the job?
So like title, department, exempt, non-exempt status, who they report to.
Perfect. Excellent. That's exactly right. So that's the identification. What else is a major item included in the job description?
Job summary.
A summary. Yeah. Very general, but what makes it different than other jobs? How about duties and responsibilities?
That's what the essential functions of the job are.
Yeah.
So like what
So important. Sorry.
Qualifications as well.
Qualifications.
skills
Good.
what are they supposed to accomplish?
Well said. Yep. All of those things. And then the last one, job specification. What's that?
It's the skills, the abilities, the knowledge that's required to perform the position or job, the education and experience needed.
Perfect. Right on. So perfect. So one of the most important things that you'll may have on your test about job descriptions is that they should be concise. Don't get hung up if they say, oh, you should have everything possible that you can think of in a job description, because sometimes that's how employers do it, because they're afraid. They want to make sure they capture everything. Well, no, it should be concise, and they should be observable action verbs, observable verbs to describe the specific actions that are in activities in the job. All right, so the information typically falls into 3 categories. General qualifications, requirements such as experience, training, and specific job preparation. Just as we discussed earlier there, the knowledge, skills, and ability and experience needed. But here now, a job specification identifies the what required for an employee to perform the job.
Minimum acceptable qualifications.
Perfect. Exactly right. Thank you. So if we're developing a competency model, there are 3 steps. And the first step is to get this first draft, list the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and seem to be important for our job performance. And this information comes from perhaps informal conversations with job holders, surveys, ideas suggested by the models. So it's rather informal. And then the second step is to systematically survey the opinion of the experts, people who know about this job, and especially those who currently work in that job. So these experts be asked to say, you know, how important are these competencies, and look at anything that they think is important. And then the third step, this is very formal. This is very data driven. It's the criterion related validation study. And this demonstrates a statistical relationship between these competencies and the measures of individual performance. We're going to talk a lot about this criterion related validation in a minute. Does anybody do that? Like if you were developing a job description and the competencies, would you do a criterion related validation study? I have to say, I've been teaching this class for 25 years. No one has ever said yes to that question. So, you know, which one do you think is the most difficult step? The third one. Yes, exactly. The last one. It is. But it's important because we're using these competency models for, you know, really important things like hiring and promotions and training and other HR functions. So they need to be validated. So let's talk about validation. In a few slides, we'll get down there and we'll talk about validation and how to validate. So perhaps we'll be able to start doing that. But in the meantime, let's talk about the difference between job analysis and job evaluation. True or false? Job analysis is the same as job evaluation. True or false? Job analysis is the same as job evaluation.
False.
Thank you, false. It shouldn't be confused. They should not be confused with each other. The job analysis focuses on what the job holder does and the KSAs needed to do it. And then the job evaluation is the procedure used to develop this wage structure by looking at the jobs within the organization to determine their relative value. Completely different operations. So don't get hung up with confusing them with each other. So there are 4 methods of job analysis. This is what we were talking about, where Eileen went to the different to learn about the different managers in different areas. I did a job analysis of administrative assistants and used 4 methods. What were those methods?
Observations,
Observations, yes. What else?
Interviews,
Mm-hmm. What else?
questionnaires,
Yep. Anything else?
employee records.
Yeah. Well, and they say recordings, and what they mean by that is like asking an employee to write down, what do you do? How many times a day do you do that? It's like a daily diary or a log. So they record what they do and how frequently they do it. Now, when I did the job analysis, we did all 4 of these things. Relied heavily on interviews and questionnaires, but they're all really good methods for that. All right. Any other thoughts, questions? All right. Let's talk about recruitments. And let's see, in your text, in the recruitment section, see if we can fill this in. Selection procedures are limited by what? Selection procedures are limited by
The effectiveness of recruiting.
in we have that in stereo, so say that again. The effectiveness of recruiting procedures. You all said it, so thank you. Yeah, selection is only limited by the effectiveness of our recruiting. So what is talent sourcing?
The function of identifying potential job candidates and converting them into job applicants.
Good. What else? Somebody else have something to add?
I mean, to me, that's what recruiting is. Like,
Okay. And so what are we trying to do when we're actually doing that talent sourcing or recruiting?
We're looking for people with the skills that we need for either current openings or like to fill our pipeline.
Good. Well said. You're creating that pipeline for us. We're researching sources, generating leads, creating networks. Yeah, really good. We have in the past, we had managers who would come forward and say, all right, I need you to just hire somebody. And he or she has to be, A, B, C, D, E, the perfect person. And yet there was no network, there was no pipeline of skilled applicants. And so we had to start creating that and teaching our hiring managers that they were part of that sourcing. HR can't just do all the sourcing and creating that pipeline. So absolutely, the lead generation and so forth is a partnership. So there are 4 steps to the recruiting process. What are they?
a strategy, searching, screening, and applicant pool maintenance.
Good. So first, And anytime you're during this test, I'm going to tell you that frequently there are a list and that you have to put steps in order, process steps in order. And so if they say, what are the 4 recruiting steps in recruiting process in order? Always the first step is about a strategy or a plan. And so that's easy. We know formulating the strategies first, and then we search, and then we screen out those who may be unfit, and then we maintain that pool. Good. Employee branding. Let's talk about branding. How is an image created?
Through the employee value proposition.
Good, thank you. What is the employment value proposition?
Describes what the company has to offer its employees relative to the rewards offered by other places of employment.
Exactly. Good. So that branding is, we're projecting this image that make people want to work for us. And so we have to figure out, well, what makes us different? What's the employment proposition, value proposition, where what do we have to offer employees rather than going to the other places of employment? What should a company's employment brand and employment value proposition do? What should that brand and EVP or employment value proposition, what should they do?
Could convince people that they want to work for you.
Yeah, they convince them by communicating what kind of things? What should communicate what?
Like
Like the
benefits,
company's
culture.
culture and values.
You guys, yep, you guys said it good. Benefits, values, culture.
The working environment,
Yeah.
pay.
Yes, compensation, exactly. You know what I think is really interesting is in our materials, it says provide an honest picture of the company's work environment. I mean, frequently you may, apply for a job and they talk about how wonderful the culture is, and then too late you find out it's not so wonderful. So be honest about a good brand and a good EVP is honest about the culture. Now, there are probably some things that, you can always say positive things, but that way, if it's honest, employees can gauge, is this the right culture for me? Might be right for someone else, but maybe not for me. All right, so the recruitment process consists of, we've already talked about that, those 4 steps, but who is largely responsible for most recruiting activities?
HR.
Yeah, HR largely, right? So who's responsible for evaluating the recruiting process to identify the most effective recruiting procedures?
HR.
Yeah, generally by the employee requisitions, right? Sent by the hiring managers. What are the formal authorities? Excuse me. What are the formal authorizations to fill positions called? Formal authorizations to fill a position.
Employee requisitions.
Employee requisition. Yes, I'm sure you all are familiar with those. But who submits the employee requisitions?
It should be the managers.
Yeah, good. The hiring or the line managers. Yeah. They're the ones who are responsible for that. That's kind of the final step, because we have to have the strategy, search the applicants, and screen out those who are unfit. Really, it's towards the end here, the screening area, and is when the managers get involved. But they submit the employee requisitions, and then we can act on that. All right. Well, the yield. Do y'all do yield ratios? Has anybody had experience using a yield ratio? think they're very helpful. They help us to know how many candidates we need to recruit for each job, and then the ratio of applicants at one stage of the recruiting process who move to the next. We're going to take a little, I know you have this in your materials, but we'll walk through it. We used this process when we were sort of going shotgun out to career fairs, to many different career fairs, and we started asking, well, what's the yield? How, we go to all these expensive places and spend all this time, and what's the yield? So we started doing the math, and we found that, some were much more worthy of our time than others. So let's look at that. For example, let's say we did 60 campus interviews, 60 people interviewed with us. They made the time to sit down, talk with us. It was great. Out of that 60, we had 10 of them that we said, hey, yeah, let's have on-site invitation, invite them to come on site so that they can meet our hiring manager, look at our office and so forth. So that is, what's the yield ratio of interviews to invitations?
That's 6 to 1.
6 to 1. Good. See right there. Good. So now we've got 10 on-site invitations. And of those 10, we had 2 job offers come out of there. So the ratio there is 5 to 1, right? Well, 2 offers went out to these candidates, and one of them accepted. One person accepted. So that was a 2 to 1 ratio. But what's the overall yield ratio from campus interviews to acceptance?
60 to 1.
Yeah, 60 to 1 overall yield ratio. So a company might say, is that an effective yield ratio? What do you think? What do you guys think?
Depends on how many people you can get in front of at the campus.
It really depends on that, right? And it maybe even depends on the position. So a high-level engineer for us, when we were out recruiting, and if we had 60 people come by and we accepted one, I think we'd probably be very happy with having a good, solid hire. Now, if it was a less expensive and a less difficult position, maybe that wouldn't be such a good yield ratio. But it helps you make those decisions. Some organizations use quality of hire. So does anybody do any of these metrics in their organizations?
We do some of them.
So the key here is using them in relation to our hiring process. It's a measure to see if our hiring process is effective. Do you all tie those things to your hiring process?
We do for our technical roles, like our engineers, in our product development team.
Excellent. Which of these do you use for that?
We use retention rate. We use a talent scorecard. We use promotion rate and promotion frequency.
So that's a great way to tell if our hiring process is effective. We could use a lot of organizations use measures like hiring process, like fill time. How long does it take us to fill this position, or the yield ratio that we just described, and those are good measures. Nothing wrong with them. That kind of measures the efficiency of the process, but quality of hire measures the effectiveness of the process, and the effectiveness is quite a different thing. So that we're able to see if we spend that much money in the hiring process or that much time, are we getting good people, or are they coming in and leaving? Are we churning them out? Which sometimes we've found that happens, where you hire them in because you're so desperate to have them, and yet they can't stay for one reason or another. So if we have a quality hiring process, we'll have positive correlation to retention, bonuses, succession planning. They're included in the succession plan. Their salaries increase. Their performance is good. That sort of thing. Quality of hire. This is a key for you on this one. Quality of hire focuses on effectiveness of the process, whereas others like fill time and yield ratio, those look at efficiency of the process. Two different things. This is more difficult to do, but it's much more valuable results. What are some of the internal and external recruiting sources that you have used? I'm going to ask you to go into breakout groups and list them. What are some of the recruiting sources you've used? And what are some issues that need to be looked at when we're evaluating the process? So if we've got some sources, but what are perhaps some concerns that happen when we've used these recruiting sources? I'll type this in the broadcast as well. So when you get your invitation, I invite you to turn on your camera, make sure you have introduced yourself to each other, and then attack these 2 questions. Got 11 people, so we're going to do 4 breakout rooms. And make sure you introduce yourself to each other, and then I will type these in the broadcast to make sure. So go ahead and just accept, and you'll have about 5 minutes to do this exercise. Oh, beautiful sunset. Okay, everybody's back. So what did you all find? Like, first of all, what were some of the recruiting sources you've used? Let's see, let's start with group one. That would have been Ashley, Lakeisha, and T. Ross. I don't know your name. I'm
I
sorry.
don't know why it keeps changing. I'll change it
Oh.
again.
I'm sorry.
It's
Um,
Teresa.
Oh, you told me that last week, Teresa. Teresa, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. All
There we
right,
go.
Teresa. Thank you very much. What'd y'all find?
Okay. Well, we found a couple different sources. As far as internal sources, we used like promoting within our job posting, internally, so that way we can maybe get someone to come over to the current department that we were recruiting for. Since they're familiar with the company, it may be an easy transition, and kind of considering them first, they've already done a lot of the like drug screens and things like that we wouldn't have to do for a new hire.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Keep going. Sorry.
Oh no, I don't want. It was just a couple of them. We also looked at temporary agencies, job fairs, private employment agencies, things like that. A couple of the ladies had different examples that they provided to the group as far as what happened when they used those agencies.
Great, great, great. Okay. Thank you. Well done. We'll go to the next group, and so that maybe they can tell us, is there anything you missed? How about Ashley and Dee? I'm sorry, you told me last week your name, and I'm gonna ask for it
That's-
again.
No, it's DeAndre. It's
DeAndre. Okay. Now, would you all come up, and Eileen was also in that group. Would you all come up with anything different?
Well, we talked about employee referrals. We talked about using job organizations. So like for software, maybe using their association, or teachers using TASA. Talked about resume searches on LinkedIn and Indeed, and reaching out to candidates.
Good, good, good. All right. Now, the next two group, I'm going to give you the harder question. What are some of the issues that need to be examined? What are some of the issues you would have to look at when you're kind of evaluating your recruiting process? How about group three, Margie, Anella, and Samantha?
Well, cost was one thing that we talked about, just when you use an outside, like an outside recruiter or even temp agency to do some of that staffing, there's a cost that's associated with that, that you're not incurring because you're not doing the actual recruiting. When you do it internal, you're incurring the cost. It's just that you don't see it nearly as much. But on like staffing agencies or recruiters per se, those are your higher costs that have a higher percentage, because they'll want you to pay for a percentage of first year salary and the like.
That's a really important concern. A lot of people worry about that cost per hire. Good. All right. Room 4, Brittany and Mel, did you have another evaluation concern, issues to be examined?
My laptop died halfway through. And I feel so bad. But Brittany was talking about, because we both used a third party for our recruitment, and she said that her third party wasn't like getting all the needs or requirements that they were looking for. And I feel like her experience was like, oh, they didn't have everything, but ours was completely opposite because I feel like our third party took a little bit longer than everybody, like usual. Like if they were interviewing in June, like they wouldn't really get hired on until late July or August. So for us, it like filtered out some of the like potential issues that we had with candidates, and so it was just cool to see like the pro and the con side of using a third party for hiring.
Interesting. There is like two sides to the same coin, right? Yeah, it just depends on what your needs are. Did we miss anything? Did anyone have something that we didn't add in here? Oh, be sure to let's see, let's go back. Look on your materials, because what they talk about, we said, you know, cost per hire and time to fill. Those are kind of your common evaluation questions. But how long do they stay? So that's the retainment. What are the yield ratios? Recruitment advertisements, are they effective? How effective are they? Are our efforts consistent with the EEOC and affirmative action goals of the company? That's an important consideration to have. Are we screening our employees appropriately? Those are some of the issues that we need to make sure that we keep on top of as we examine our recruiting process. Good job on that, you guys. Thank you. All right, I want you to think about an upper level management position. So let's say that position becomes vacant in your organization. Maybe your CEO, maybe your COO. Anyway, just an upper level management position that becomes vacant in your own organization. Tell us about what happens if you all do promotion from within. Promotion from within. Who will take that? And tell me, what are the advantages and disadvantages of filling that position by promoting from within? You may have already experienced it.
I'd say from promoting from within, you get the biases. You got the objective versus subjective. You know, you've got a manager from another department calling in a favor to another manager in another department to get their friend or somebody they really like promoted, and so that's definitely a disadvantage. But from, you know, internal candidates, you also find people that are, a lot of the job descriptions, I'll say with our company, for instance, we'll say for an inventory department, we'll have 3 or 4 different job positions in inventory, and we want to make sure that some of the KSAs and everything are different people can cover those. So it'll depend if it's an inventory control specialist 1 versus 2. You know, some of those same things are going to fall in the job description. So it's already covered. And so that makes it a little bit easier to have a little bit of flex for those positions. So that's also another advantage. You've got people that have the capability to get there because they're already doing a few of those tasks. So just to give a few.
Those are some really good, that's a good picture of advantages and disadvantages of promoting from within. So I think DeAndre, we got captured pretty much all of these. Yeah, we got promotion opportunities. It really motivates people internally, provides better opportunity, morale, perform the job with little lost time. That's what DeAndre was saying. You know, they already know the job. They can do some of those things. But he also talked about, you know, narrow thinking, stale ideas, political infighting and pressures. Yeah, strong management development program is needed. And also it makes them more of a homogenous workforce, which can be good and bad. All right, let's think about our company. Think about an external hire. What are the advantages of an external hire? You may have experienced this. Advantages and disadvantages. Who will jump on this?
I think with a new hire outside, they bring a fresh pair of eyes. Like they can let us see problems that maybe we were blind to because we're so used to it. And so they're able to create a little bit more order, or just be like, hey, this is not really efficient. It works, but it's not the best way. And I think some of the disadvantages is, sometimes people are like, oh, they don't know how we do things here. And, that person might receive a lot of pushback just because they're not used to the culture, the way that things were already processed before.
Great examples. And all of those are spot on. Yeah, we can, like you said, new ideas, new insights. They can make changes without having to please people because they really don't know their constituent groups, but does not change the present organizational hierarchy as much, and may give you more diversity. When we hire from outside, we may get better diversity and help achieve our EEO goals. And some of the disadvantages, it's going to take them time to gear up. So that's lost time. And then the incentive of present employees. Information's available about the information's ability to fit with the rest of the organization. There's that culture fit that Mel mentioned. Perhaps they don't really fit the culture. They don't know about the culture. Potential lawsuit if the new employee signed a non-compete with a competitor. So that's just some advantages and disadvantages. Good stories and application. Thank you. That helps us all retain. All right, let's move on to selection. We covered planning, recruitment, and now selection. And a lot of times when we either teach a class or we take a class in selection, we hear past behavior is a good predictor of future behavior. Is that true? Somebody jump on this one.
Yes, that's true.
You think it's true? Okay. Tell me more. Have you seen it, or tell me how do you use that concept, please?
Well, I don't want to say always, but
Okay.
it's definitely, if you're looking at a resume and everything, and you're seeing they worked for this company for 2 years, 3 years, and you look at the next company, they worked there for 2, 3 years, then you're probably looking at turnover within the next 2 or 3 years for this job. Also, just depending on when you get them in there for interview questions, hey, is this, and they answer why they left those positions, it kind of gives you a little bit more clear understanding of any type of future behaviors, depending on if there is a trend and the reason why they left, So I can't say always, but I would definitely say it's a good predictor for future behavior.
Great. Thank you, DeAndre. Anybody else have ideas or thoughts on this? In general, as we were just saying, in general, yes, it is true. Because we can look at what they've done in the past. When we interview them, they can tell us about what they've done in the past. And generally, their past behavior is a pretty good predictor of their future performance. People who are honest and committed and dedicated before, it's probably going to be the same way in our job as well. But sometimes people change. So changes can happen, especially when people work on improving themselves, or if they have a significant life change, such as a death in the family, or they've moved to a new environment, or changes in their health. Some dramatic changes, those can change their personality. So just FYI, yeah, it generally is, but sometimes it's not always a good predictor. Generally it is. So selection, informed hiring decisions depend on understanding that past behavior is the best predictor and collecting as much reliable and valid data. So we're going to talk about that reliable and valid data again. So time and money put into the selection process should be balanced with the cost of making a poor hiring decision. Who assumes the major responsibility of employee selection? We said before, we asked that question, and we said HR department. They normally reduce that field down to 3 or 4 people, and then the line managers interview and make their selection. But that time and money put into selection process should be balanced with the cost. So if we are making a hiring decision for a C level, well, probably it's going to take us a whole lot more time and money than if we were hiring for a lower level position. And then we have to keep track of our applicants for many reasons. Of course, as we discussed last week, that our legal reasons are most important, but we can use various systems. Does anybody still use a paper file system?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good. Thank you, Brittany. Some people, a lot of people actually say yes to that. And just to know that it's a valid system. It's perfectly fine. Now we've moved, a lot of people have moved to software, web-based or cloud, but they're available, but it's fine, especially if you're in a smaller organization, it's easy, it's fine. So these systems generally do these tasks. We post job listings, we collect information on the applicants, we store the data, we have tools then to screen, assess, and rank our applicants. We track them, manage the schedule of the events while they're being recruited and selected, even notifying the applicants. I remember when I first started in HR, every applicant, I would write a letter, response, every single one I wrote a response to by hand. We'd had no system, but it was fine. I thought it was fine, and I tell you what, it helped grow our who we are in the in the community, and we began to have a good reputation in the community, and people appreciate that handout, that reaching out. It integrates the organization's HR information system, and it generates reports for us, especially when we want to assess the effectiveness of our process. All right, here's our typical steps. This is very broad. See if your company or your organization mirrors this broad process. It's a sequence when we're selecting people. It's a sequence. So some of or all of the steps may be used in your organization. First thing we do is we screen people. Preliminary screening, whether it's through applicants, applications, that kind of thing, and using the application banks. If the person doesn't meet our criteria, we reject them. Then if they do meet our criteria, we may interview them. But if we don't like them, again, we reject them. If now we've interviewed them and we like them, we may do some employment testing on them. If they don't do well in the employment test, there we can reject them. So it's just a screening out process, step by step. Reference and background checks, if they fail there, we can reject them. Drug testing, we can reject them if they don't come back satisfactory. And then the final interview, we can still reject them at that point. That's when we make our selection decision and offer. And there's still the rejection is possible, and then the post-offer medical exam, all the way up to placement on the job. So let's ask this question: where are the costliest steps in this process? Where are the most costly steps in this process?
I think it's probably going to be at the beginning and probably in the middle for drug and alcohol testing, and background checking, background check to go along with like I said, the beginning steps of, the recruiting on Indeed or wherever that's going to be pretty costly too.
Oh, good point. Good point. Well, I think we try to put the most costly, you're right. Our process, if we're using a third party to do our, like Indeed, or to do our applicant tracking, if we're doing that, it's going to be costly. But in the process, as we move along, you're right, it starts to get expensive more in here. And it's expensive here because we're doing a lot of having perhaps senior leaders take their time and interview. So generally, we try to do a cost benefit analysis. In other words, we probably wouldn't have the highest level people at this final interview stage because it's costly. But those should be placed towards the end of the process, not at the very beginning, when there are fewer applicants in the pool. So it's better. Now let's dig into that reliability and validity of this process. So what is reliability? What does it mean?
You're going to get the same result each time.
It's repeatability. Yes, good. The greater the confidence we can have, it's every time we get the same answer. It serves as it goes hand in hand with validity. All right, here's a true and false for you. True or false? If a measuring instrument is not reliable, it cannot be valid.
True.
That is true. It cannot be valid because, as we just said, reliability means it gives us the same answer time after time. And if that doesn't happen, it's not valid. Unreliable information can't be used to predict performance on the job. So what are some of the major reasons why selection information may be unreliable? What are some of the major reasons why selection information may be unreliable?
The selection instrument may be ambiguous and unclear. The
Good.
person using the measuring instrument may not have a clear perception of the behavior being measured or a well-defined standard to use as a basis for making an evaluation. Behavior being evaluated may be an unstable phenomenon that changes from time to time, such as personal feelings.
Great. That's exactly what I wanted you to read. So there are many reasons why an instrument may not be reliable, but our goal is to make it as reliable as possible. All right, so the reliability of a measuring instrument is estimated by different types of tests. And these testing procedures are referred to as what? Testing procedures to find the reliability of a measuring instrument.
Operational
definitions.
Great. And there are 4 of them. What are they?
Test, retest reliability, alternate forms reliability, split halves reliability, and iterator reliability.
Excellent. Good. So each of those methods that we just saw, this is my slide that I put in to try to clarify this concept. There's my dryer. You can probably hear the dryer. Each of these methods produces a correlation coefficient. It's a number that can range between, find that in your materials.
+1 and -1.
Right. So we say the correlation of 2 variables. In these 3 pictures, you'll see look at the first one. We have a perfect positive correlation. That means that every time one of the variables occurs, every time the second variable occurs. And that gives us a +1. Now, if we test a variable and sometimes the second variable occurs or sometimes it doesn't, it's just random. It doesn't really, one variable doesn't affect the other. Oops, we may have a 0. That would be a 0 correlation. And then the last one is a perfect negative. That means every time one of those variables occurs, the second one does not occur. It's a negative correlation. We can count on the fact that if we do one thing, the second thing will not occur. And again, the zero nor correlation. So each of these methods that we just saw has a correlation coefficient between +1 to -1. Either it happens every single time, or it happens none of the times, or there's no correlation at all. It's random. Thoughts or questions on this? This can be a difficult concept. Let's look further into it. I'm not going to go into that. That's too much information. We'll go further into it, and then we'll dig in, and I hope you'll have questions if some of these concepts, if they don't sink in. So when the selection procedure does not create an adverse impact on our employment and our employer, is the employer legally obligated to validate it? So we're seeing that we've got this selection procedure. Remember last week we tested it to find if there was adverse impact. We did the 4/5 rule, and we found that no, there's no adverse impact. So should the employer validate it anyway? Should we validate our procedure?
In a
If it's
perfect world, yes. Because then when you do get questioned, you are already showing you're doing the right thing.
That's a good point. Yeah. So you're not required, if it's not creating an adverse impact, we're not required to validate it anyway. But think about it. If our selection procedure is not valid, it's not even giving us any useful information, and it's sort of a waste of time and money. So yeah, we should go ahead and attempt to validate, as you said, Ashley, in a perfect world, to validate all selection procedures. All right, let's dig into validity then. We said reliability goes hand in hand with validity. Who can define validity?
Measuring what you're intending it to measure.
Yeah, it measures what it says it's going to measure. Good. So we have predictor variables and we have criteria variables that we're going to talk to in a minute. But predictor variables, those are variables that all kinds of information that are collected as part of the employment process, such as application blanks and interview data, test scores, personal references. Those are called predictor variables. And then there's some examples of criterion variables. Those are a measure of job performance, such as things like productivity, absenteeism, tardiness, evaluations. So it's kind of about the success on the job. So predictor variables, it's more about collected as part of the employment process, and criterion variables are after they're in the job and sort of what's their success look like on the job. So predictor variables, we said it's information such as application forms, interviews, employment test scores, and then the criterion variables are more about once they're in the job and how successful are they in the job. And so when we look at these two together, the correlation should have a significance at a 0.05 level of significance. That means, let me ask you, what does that mean, if you know? Well, it means 5 times out of 100 that it's correct. So, or 5 times out of 100 that it's not correct. So the significance would be 95% of the time that they are correct. So if the validity coefficient is greater than 0, just significantly, like 0.05, then the predictor is considered valid. It can now be used to select the best employee. So about 95%. Now, the uniform guidelines gives us some strategies for kind of validating our selection process. What are their 3 major strategies?
Criterion related validity, content validity, and construct validity.
Good. Any selection procedure that has an adverse impact on the hiring of protected people is discriminatory unless it's been validated using these procedures that are approved or described by the uniform guidelines. Each of the methods is acceptable to the EEOC. So whenever possible, employers are encouraged to do that. And again, the EEOC adopts that 0.05 level of statistical significance, which means there's only 5 chances in 100 of obtaining a correlation this high when there's really no relationship. That's just remember that 0.05 is going to be the key number for you to remember. They probably won't get into a whole lot of statistical questions for you on the test. So we said, all right, the uniform guidelines said that predictive validity and concurrent validity are approved. They're described by the uniform guidelines. So what's the difference between predictor and concurrent validity? Think about it. Concurrent.
So predictive is what you're going to do prior to bringing somebody on to assess that skill, assess that fit, and to predict whether you think they're going to be able to be successful in the job you're hiring into. Where concurrent validity is going to be you're gathering that information at the same time as they're performing the job, evaluating that as they are gaining that skill.
Great, well said. So you see by this visual here, we see that the predictive validity is we collect the predictor data on the job applicants and then collect the data when they are on the job and compare the two, where concurrent validity collects the predictor data and the criteria data at the same time from present employees. That's a good little visual to help us get that concept. So we've got these selection processes and we want to validate them. And so we talked about the uniform guidelines, and they say there's 3 criterion: content and construct validity. Let's see, let's move on. Can a selection procedure be reliable without being valid? Can a selection procedure be reliable without being valid? (50-50) chance, just jump in here.
Yes.
Yes, it can be. Remember we said reliable means what? Happens the same. Sorry?
Repeatability. You'll get the same result.
Yes, exactly. Same result, repeatability. And valid means?
Measures what you want it to measure.
What it says it's going to measure. Exactly. So it can continue. A selection procedure could be consistent, repeatability, but not valid, not measuring what you think it's going to measure. But can a selection procedure be valid without being reliable? We've already asked this question. The answer to that is?
No.
Yeah, no, it cannot be. Good. Well done. All right, do a couple more concepts before we have a break. So we're all familiar with application forms, I assume. Application forms, what's the purpose of them?
Collect information.
Yeah, give us some meaningful employment information so that we can, to help us make decisions. Well, true or false, an application blank can be used to eliminate applicants who are obviously unqualified. Is that true or false?
True.
True. Yes, that's what they're really, it's the first screening method for that. All right, true or false? The application form is commonly useful in making fine discriminations between the best qualified applicants.
False.
False. It's seldom useful in that those fine discriminations, those fine details. So we usually ask for things like, vital statistics, name, address, phone number, education, work history, background experiences, but they really don't give us a lot of information to make a solid decision about hiring the individual. So application blanks can be reliable and valid, but they have some limitations. True or false? Applications can substitute for direct personal contact with an employee or with a company representative. Applications can substitute for direct personal contact.
False.
False, absolutely. Individuals who have unique backgrounds or experiences may have difficulty describing what they have done on a given form.
True.
That's true. They don't really get into that. Unfavorable information may be omitted or watered down on these forms.
True.
True, yeah. Could be not completely honest on those. Application blanks tell the how or why, but not the what of an individual's background, which may be more important. Do applications blanks tell us the
False.
how? That's
False.
false, because they tell us of the what, not the how or why, right? What they did, just not how they did it or why they did it. The interpretation is subject to observer biases.
True.
That's true. Good job on all of those. All right. Well, let's take a break, and we will just take a how about a 10-minute break? It's 8:30. Let's say we get back at 8:40, and we should be able to finish this up before our closing time. So see you back here at 8:40.
You meant 7:40?
Oh, sorry. I'm on Eastern time tonight. Yes, 7:40. Thank you. Okay, I've got 8:40. Let's get back at it. As quick as we can here. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Yep. And I am not on mute. That's good. So we're talking about our selection process and making sure it's valid and reliable. And application blanks came up. We started talking about how, yeah, they might be valid and reliable, but they don't give us a whole lot of information. So there's an attempt to make them more useful to us, and they're called weighted application blanks. And so this is where we correlate each piece of information that we ask for, and we give it a performance criterion. And so the way that we do that is we use a procedure. Now I've put these procedure steps on the slide here, but I'm going to invite you to choose which should go first, second, third, fourth. We're going to put them in order. And the reason I'm doing this is because many times on the test, you get a list of things and you're asked to put them in order. So here we have this description. This is we're saying that this weighted application blank has performance criterion associated with each item. So what will be the first step in the procedure of creating a weighted application blank? First step.
Choose the performance criterion.
Good. Yes, that's the first step. First, what's our criterion that we're going to assign to it? Okay, what would be our second step?
Identify the criterion groups.
Good. That's right. What's the third step?
Select the application blank items to be analyzed.
Yep. Okay. Fourth step.
Divide each item into specific response categories.
Good. All right. Fifth step.
Determine the weights.
Determine the weights. Good. And sixth step.
Confirm the weights.
Confirm them using holdout groups. Yeah, good. And then the last step is establish that cutoff score. Who are we going to weed out? So that's good learning about the procedure, also about the technique of putting things in order. So well done. Well, of course, as with our selection, we've certainly got to be concerned that the EEOC, tells us that the following kinds of information can look to them as if they could be demonstrating perhaps some divisiveness, some illegal. They would draw their attention to our application forms. So what are some of the things that draw the EEOC attention? Unless it's a business necessity, what are some of the things that if we ask, EEOC might sit up and take notice?
Height and weight.
Yeah, right. Good. What else?
Marital status or info about children.
Excellent. My
Okay.
boss at my last job had I think I may have told you that, but during one of her interviews, somebody asked her, who's going to take care of your kids while you're working? So that was a good one. Anyway, sorry, go ahead, please. Next one. Anything else?
Educational level.
Good.
English language skills.
Interesting one, isn't it? You think about the communication needs, but is it a business necessity? Now, if it is, you just have to be able to prove it. What else?
Names of friends or relatives working for the employer.
Yeah.
Now, why is that an issue?
Let's think about that. Why do you think that might be an issue?
If you don't like that employee, no.
Well, this is the EEOC saying, hey, caution, be careful of these kinds of questions. Why might that one be a red flag?
It could determine the diversity of the individual, and there's the GINA issue as well. They know something about a family member.
Could be, but I think the first one is probably most likely with the EEOC is about, when we hire friends and relatives consistently, it tends to draw a red flag about diversity. Because when we start hiring people who everyone looks like us, it becomes a diversity question. And so we want to make sure that we're not having any problems in that area, and that we have a nice diverse workforce. So I think DeAndre, that would be the answer for that.
Well, I think that these are relatively interesting because I just applied for a ton of jobs and got a new job, but most of the applications asked my educational level, my English language skills, my conviction and arrest records, if I knew anybody had friends or relatives that worked there. So most of the applications I filled out had all of, the majority of these things on there.
Pretty interesting, yeah? I mean,
Yeah.
when you look at them, I agree. So I suppose you were applying for a human resources position.
Mm-hmm.
So is it important that you speak English? I mean, is it a business necessity? Yeah, probably so, right?
Probably so. But
yeah.
honestly, I don't think educational level is. I mean, I
Okay.
have it, but I don't think it is a necessity.
Yeah. Well, it might be something. It's just the EEOC is cautioning employers about these. Employers, if they have it on there, they need to be able to prove that it's a business necessity. Pretty interesting. All right, let's go to interviews. So, true or false? Employment interviews are generally unreliable. Unreliable. Remember, we said reliability means it gives us the consistent, repeatable.
True. Generally,
That's true. That's true. They are unreliable. So therefore, they do not provide valid information. So what's the purpose for conducting employment interviews?
to gather more information.
About the applicant, right?
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Oh, and to give information about the company.
Good.
And what the actual job is that the person's applying for.
Good. Yep. Establish a relationship, I suppose. But that's about it, because interestingly, that the studies have shown that the purpose of the interview is to get this information so that we can make a selection, but our interviews don't really have the results that we'd hope for on that. So let's talk about the different types of interviews, and you'll see the list there in your materials. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you about the different types of interviews, and you tell me what you think is the type. Let's see, we should have the types of interviews. So example, which are the most reliable method of gathering information in an interview? Which type of interview? Most reliable method.
Patterned, structured interview.
Patterned, yes, they're structured. Good. The patterned is most reliable. Which are not as reliable, but they're used frequently for interviewing because they require less advanced preparation. Frequently used, less advanced preparation, but not as reliable.
Non-directive.
Non-directives, and semi-structured is the big picture on that. Semi-structured, but the non-directive which is also similar, but they're largely inappropriate for gathering information to make a selection decision, but they're good for counseling purposes. Is that non-directive, where we're not really drilling down and asking specifics. We're being very vague, very non-directive, which are designed to see whether people can think on their feet in uncomfortable situations. Whoops. Which are designed to see whether people can think on their feet in uncomfortable situations.
Stress interview.
Good. Which ones are used for diagnosing how well a group is functioning?
Group interviews?
Group interviews. Good. Which are designed to allow several interviewers to obtain information about one individual simultaneously.
Panel?
Yeah, panel or board interviews. Yep. That's sure that takes less time than having separate interviews, but boy, they're pretty intimidating. Has anybody ever done them? They're so intimidating, but they take less time. All right, good on those. Be aware also, you've probably had plenty of times to look at these or study these impressions and biases. Does anybody have a question about, because by the way, human beings take these mental shortcuts. It's kind of the way our brains work. So these shortcuts are necessary to make things quicker and to solve problems and decision making, but sometimes they can create problems. And if we're not aware of what's going on, then we can start getting biases in our employment interview process. Does anybody have a question about what any of these mean? Or perhaps some experience with some of them?
I mean,
Oh, go
see,
ahead,
like,
please, Ashley.
the similarity and the halo effect we see constantly at my firm is like they try to hire people that mirror somebody that we already have. They're like, oh, he's a little miniature Andrew. And it's like, well, do we need an entire firm of Andrews? No.
Yeah.
And that also goes with the stereotyping. It's like, okay, well, if they're from TCU and they were a fellow and they were this specific group, like sorority or fraternity, that means they're legit. And it's like, no, they're not.
Those are great examples of those. Other examples. Whoop. Hang on.
I guess it would be the anchoring bias. Is that the one where you learn something early on and like you're just stuck on that one point?
Yeah.
So we
Yeah,
had that happen with our with our sales folks. An interviewer will ask what kind of KPIs the salesperson is accustomed to and like what the frequency is. And if they don't say a monthly target, or if they do say a monthly target, it's like they've got the right answer and nothing else they're going to say is matters. And if they didn't say it, they kind of turn off their brain and stop listening.
Wow. Good example. Again, these are shortcuts that we sort of do when we're trying to solve problems, but it's really important to not be lazy and to be very aware of these bias that occur as we're interviewing. I think I shared with you that one time I interviewed for an HR position, and the interviewer was a CFO, and she found out that I was a runner at the time, and we talked about running through the whole interview, never talked about the job, and I got the job. Why wouldn't I? It was so much about similar. I was similar to her in some ways, but they did not dig into my to my knowledge, skills, abilities, any of that on that interview. So very poorly done. All right. Why are employment interviews so reliable? We sort of talked about this, but why are they so unreliable? I'm going to ask you to go into breakout groups and find out why are they unreliable and what can be done to increase the reliability of an interview. I'll put these in your broadcast as well. And just go ahead and let's recreate those so that we have a little bit bigger groups, and go ahead and just accept that when you get the invitation. And we'll take about 7 minutes for this, 7 minutes. Okay, we only had 3 breakout rooms this time. So what did you all come up with? Why are interviews so unreliable? And anybody can jump in here.
Because people do them.
Because what?
Because people do them and people are unreliable.
The human factor.
Yep.
And what about the human factor causes this unreliability?
All of the different biases that we have, conscious or unconscious.
Good. That's absolutely true. What else?
Lack of training or understanding of the proper questions to ask during an interview process for supervisors, managers, first line or first time supervisor managers. So.
Yeah, lack of training. The questions asked, they could be different from one to the other. Some may get more in-depth questions. They may be inconsistent. And the moods either way of the interviewer or the interviewee. What else?
I think it kind of follows what Eileen and others have said, like, we're human, but if you're not given a game plan going into it, like you have to find this out. Like, this is your one goal. Like, if you're going to do a technical interview, like, I don't care what they do in their extracurriculars. I need you to assess this task. And then if they don't follow the tasks and do what they're supposed to do because they got distracted, then it's pointless.
So we used to get such pushback, to your point, Ashley, we used to get such pushback from our managers, hiring managers, because they wanted to do that social exchange, that random sort of interaction, which is nice and it puts people at ease. But they really wanted to get into this, are you going to fit our culture? So more into their personal and individual random social exchange. When we put an end to that, we got some pushback about that, got a lot of pushback about that. But you're exactly right. It's if it's not job related, it just is pointless. All right. So what did we find? What do we think how are we going to increase the reliability of the interview?
Like a specific rating scale.
Okay.
Did they answer it when, if we did a case study or something technical based, how many steps did they cover? Like on a scale of 1 to 5, did they give you all 5 points or did they give you 1 point?
Much more structured. That's good. And systematic. Anybody come up with other things? In the next section next week, we'll talk about rating skills. Of course, we'll be talking about performance, but the rating skills, if they're referring to specific behaviors, they're much more reliable. So you can have your rating scales, but make sure that they refer to specific behaviors, not just, oh, did he have good leadership, and anything vague like that. Clearly defined, organized, that sort of thing. Well done. Good job. Let's move on. So, yeah, we got reliability and validity in our interview. It's highly questionable according to what our studies have found and that our information is based on. The inner rate of reliability is low. Intra rate of reliability can be high, depending on the competence of the interviewer and whether the interview is highly structured. As you all just described, the more structured, the more reliable. Although interviewers are not able to consistently evaluate most personal characteristics, higher reliabilities are usually obtained on characteristics that are directly observable. To Ashley's point, a test perhaps, or that we have characteristics that are job related and directly observable. Structured interviews are more reliable than those that are less. So sort of sums up what we said. Here's some more on that as well. These The structured interviews have been found to be reasonably valid. However, validity are lower than other predictors. So even if the interview is good and valid, just know that that interview validity is lower than other predictors, such as tests and that sort of thing. Because it's lack of reliability, it's not a good predictor of job performance, not a valid predictor, and that evaluations are mostly unrelated to students' grade point averages. So interviewers always ask about the GPAs, and it's really interesting because the studies show that interview evaluations are unrelated to those GPAs. Some see it positively and some see it negatively. So even though the interview can serve as some functions, it's not a very reliable selection tool for predicting those outstanding performers. So just to have that in mind, sometimes we hang our hats on those. Personal tests represent a valuable selection device if personnel tests are a valuable selection device if what?
If the characteristics, I lost it. Where'd it go?
You're on the right track.
There it is. If the characteristics being measured are important to successful job performance.
Good. That's it. Exactly right. So choosing an appropriate test requires a careful what? See if you can find that. Choosing an appropriate test for pre-employment testing.
Job analysis.
Good. Yes. A job analysis by somebody who knows the job. Good. And here's some examples of pre-employment tests. All right. I think we have a bit of time. Let's take a quick 5-minute breakout, and I'm going to have 3 breakout groups, and each one gets a different question. If you're in group 1, we'll keep the same ones as we had last time. So that's Ashley, Lakeisha, and Anella. You do the first question. How would you decide which test to include in a test battery? Number 2 is DeAndre, Eileen, Margie, Samantha. How could you learn which tests are available? And group 3, Brittany, Mel, and Teresa, how could you make sure that you had selected good tests? I'll try to put these in your broadcasts, and we'll only take 5 minutes. So answer just one question, the one you've been assigned. Questions? All right, 5 minutes, quick as you can. Okay, what did we get? The first question is, let me go ahead and share my screen again. Okay. So the first question for the first group, what did you come up with when you said, how would you decide?
We said you're looking at your job analysis first. What position are you looking for? What skill sets are you looking for? Because then that will tweak your aptitude tests, your physical abilities tests, like all of those other things.
Perfect. That's exactly right. That job analysis with all those intricate details really helps with the decide about the successful performance attributes. Okay, how about group number 2? How would you learn which tests are available?
So we found in the book references to commercially available test lists such as Test in Print and the Mental Measurements Yearbook, which give you info about the test, like describing the test itself, what it measures, how to obtain a specimen set, how long it takes to administer, blah, blah, blah. But also includes reliability and validity studies. And then it also mentions the Association of Test Publishers. And then just looking at like position specific things, like, so what do certain types of positions need to be tested for? So go to associations that handle those types of professionals.
Really good answer, very detailed answer, and you hit all of the important points. Well done, thank you. Group 2, well done. How about group 3? How could you make sure you selected good tests? Group 3. Oh, yeah.
We were thinking of just having, well, on the book it said that they just having, sorry, it's been a long day.
It has been a long day.
Just having, the way I thought of it was having every department kind of take the test from like your line managers and your execs and then your HR team, and just kind of seeing if everyone kind of gets the same range, and if everyone kind of differs and has like different scores, and it might have not been the best selection.
Okay, good. That's a good way. And be sure to use those concurrent validity studies. You know, by doing that validation study, that's a really good way to tell if the test is valid, reliable, and effective. So watch out for these legal and privacy issues. These are things that we've already talked about ad nauseum tonight, but it's a good summary here. Be careful especially because of discrimination, and it can be very problematic, and even if we don't know that we're doing it. So that's important. Which case in the Supreme Court kind of really drew our attention to selection procedures?
Briggs versus Duke Power Company.
Good. Exactly. So yeah, back in the 60s, 70s, they tested indiscriminately. It was just, all over the board. They didn't know if their tests were valid, and rather than validate the test, some companies just eliminated the test from their selection procedures. So we don't use this test that often unless they've been highly validated. They're too problematic in this way. In this case, Washington v. Davis, disproportionately large percentage of Black applicants were disqualified from police training because they had low test scores on the civil service exam. But the Supreme Court affirmed the legality of valid tests, even if they disqualified a disproportionate larger percentage of one ethnic group. So the Supreme Court endorsed the use of this exam since it was shown that the test scores successfully predicted performance in the training program. In other words, when called to question, they had to demonstrate that the test scores were successfully predicting performance. So good. Assessment centers are used when there's a group of applicants and they're either hiring or for promotion. True or false, assessment centers have generally been poor predictors of job performance. True or false, assessment centers have generally been poor predictors of job performance.
False.
That's false. They've been excellent predictors. Using these activities, in basket, group discussion, individual tests, interviews, business games, all of those things are really good predictors and a great way to ask. In basket exercise, I'm gonna see if we can move through. We only have a couple more slides, but just be sure to read about what the in basket exercise pretty much is what it sounds like. They ask somebody to go through an in basket and what would you do if you had this role? And then the in basket has all these emails and directions on what's going on in the job. True or false, valid predictors typically produce expectancy charts with long bars for high predictions. Wow, that's difficult to read. Valid predictors typically produce expectancy charts with long bars for high predictor scores and short bars for low predictor scores. I'm going to give you that's true. These are just a way of illustrating the validity of a test and being able to interpret those test scores. And so they have long bars to show high predictor scores and short bars for low predictor scores. Background investigations include an investigation of things like previous employment, educational credentials, criminal activities, credit records, general characters. And the depth of that investigation depends on the potential cost of making a poor decision. In other words, a CFO, you're going to do a lot of investigation about their background and criminal activities and credit records. Whereas somebody who's mowing the lawn for us, we probably wouldn't give them that deep of a background investigation. The qualified privilege doctrine allows past employers to share relevant job application. You know, interestingly, a lot of companies say we can't share information about previous employees. Well, this qualified privilege doctrine says, yes, as long as the information is factual and relevant and it serves a legitimate business purpose, we can and should share information about applicants with future employers. We got a little bit too antsy about, we didn't want to be slandering anyone, but if it's true, factual, relevant, and serves a legitimate business purpose, we can and should share that information. So don't get hung up on that. Let's see. Can an employer be held liable for injuries committed by its employees? What do you think?
True.
True.
Yes. Makes employer, they can be, if the employer knew or should have known about their propensity for that conduct. So yeah, we should be very careful about digging into the backgrounds. I think that's good. We talked about medical examinations in the past, and I think that's a good stopping place for tonight. It's just around 9:28. Does anybody have questions or thoughts they'd like to share before we wrap it up? I appreciate your interaction. Really helps with our retention. So next time we're going to talk about leadership, learning and development, and there'll be even more interaction on that one. But Any other thoughts or questions? All right, well, I think that's good for us for this evening. You guys have hung in there. Oh, wait a minute, oh gosh, it's only 8:30, isn't it? I'm on the East Coast, and so it makes a big difference, but we'll go ahead and wrap it up anyway. There's just we're at the last 2 slides. And so I apologize for that. But hey, you get off a little bit early tonight, and just cover the concepts of just make sure that the validation selection process, and that's really it for the evening. And it's just a summary of what we've done for the past couple hours. So if you have any questions, hang in there. I'll hang in here afterwards, and we'll pick it back up again next week. I'll try to set my clock on the Central Time next time. So, all right, you guys have a great evening. We'll talk next time.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You too.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.